The bass of the music thumped through the crowded club, shaking the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't my scene, but it was Sherry's night, and she deserved it, or so I thought. As her husband, I couldn't say no when she begged for a girls' night out, with the stipulation that I'd pick her up when the night ended. It had been a long week, and if anyone deserved to blow off some steam, it was my wife. Sherry had always been the life of the party. Her laughter was infectious, her energy boundless. At 34, she still turned heads wherever we went, her honey blonde hair cascading in soft waves, her sharp hazel eyes commanding attention. Tonight, she was radiant, wearing a sleek red dress that hugged her figure in ways that left me both proud and a little possessive. "Just us girls," she'd said, grinning as she kissed me on her way out the door. "You'll survive one night without me, won't you?" The truth was, I wasn't worried. I trusted Sherry implicitly. We'd been married for 9 years, built a life together, and while things weren't perfect, they were solid, or so I believed. When I arrived at the club around midnight to pick her up, the place was a chaotic mess of strobe lights, sweat, and booming beats. The doorman barely looked up as I pushed through the entrance, scanning the crowd for Sherry's unmistakable silhouette. I spotted her at the bar, laughing with her friends, her cheeks flushed from what I assumed was dancing. The moment I approached, though, something felt off. Her laugh was louder than usual, her smile a little too wide. The scent of tequila wafted from her as she leaned in to hug me. "You're early," she slurred, though it was clear from her wobbling stance that she'd had more than her fair share of drinks. Her friend Lisa caught my eye and gave a subtle shrug, mouthing, "She's fine. Let's get you home," I said, sliding an arm around her waist for support. She didn't resist, but there was something in the way she clung to me that made my stomach twist, something desperate, almost apologetic. The drive home was quiet, Sherry dozing off in the passenger seat. Her phone buzzed once, twice, lighting up with messages she didn't check. I thought nothing of it, focusing instead on keeping the car steady as her head lolled against the window. When we got home, I helped her inside, guiding her up the stairs to our bedroom. "You're such a good husband," she murmured as I slipped off her shoes. "I don't tell you that enough." "You can tell me tomorrow," I replied, kissing her forehead. "Get some rest." The morning sun spilled into our bedroom, cutting through the curtains I'd forgotten to draw the night before. Sherry groaned, burying her face deeper into the pillow as if the light itself was a personal attack. I smiled to myself, watching her stir. She always looked so peaceful when she slept, her wild energy subdued into something softer, more tender. "Good morning," I said quietly, handing her a glass of water and a couple of ibuprofen from the nightstand. She squinted at me, her lips curving into a lazy smile. "Good morning, you're an angel. You look like you had fun last night," I teased, settling beside her on the bed. Sherry chuckled weakly, wincing at the sound of her own voice. "Too much fun. I think tequila and I need to break up." She sat up slowly, cradling her head. "How'd I get home? Did I embarrass myself?" "No, you were fine," I reassured her. "Just a little tipsy. I'm pretty sure Lisa and the others saw worse." Her laugh was short, almost nervous, as she took a long sip of water. "Thanks for picking me up. You're the best, seriously." It felt like any other morning after a night out, but there was something I couldn't shake. A feeling that gnawed at the back of my mind. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes when she spoke, or how she seemed distracted. By noon, Sherry was back to her usual self. She puttered around the kitchen, still in her pajamas, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I was catching up on emails at the dining table when her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound drew both our gazes, her movement a fraction of a second faster than mine. "Work?" I asked casually, watching as she snatched the phone and turned her back to me. "Yeah," she said a little too quickly. "Nothing important." She put the phone face down on the counter, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the edge. I couldn't help but notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her usual ease seemed to falter. I decided not to push. "How about we order in tonight? Pizza and a movie? Something low-key." Her face lit up, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Perfect. You're really spoiling me today. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully, but the feeling of unease lingered. Sherry was attentive, affectionate even, but something about her felt forced. Like she was trying too hard to make things seem normal. That evening, as we settled on the couch with slices of pizza and a mindless comedy playing on the TV, I noticed her glancing at her phone every so often. She'd laugh at the movie, lean into me, but then her attention would flicker to the dark screen lying next to her. Expecting a call? I asked, keeping my tone light. She jumped slightly, shaking her head. No, just, work's been crazy lately. You know how it is. But I didn't. Sherry worked as an event coordinator, and while her job could be demanding, she rarely brought the stress home. It wasn't like her to seem this on edge. By the time we went to bed, my own anxiety had started to creep in. I couldn't pinpoint what was bothering me, but I knew something wasn't right. As I lay there, listening to her steady breathing beside me, I told myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, Sherry seemed lighter, as if the cloud from the day before had lifted. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out to meet Lisa for brunch, her usual energy restored. Don't wait up, she teased. I smiled and waved as she drove off, but the unease I'd felt since the club only deepened. It wasn't until later, when I picked up her phone by accident while tidying, that I saw it, a message preview on her lock screen from someone named Danny. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, willing the message to vanish, to mean something innocent, but the words stayed, burning into my mind. And just like that, the seeds of doubt began to sprout. Sherry didn't get back until late that evening. I spent the day trying to focus on yard work, tinkering with the lawnmower, and organizing the garage, anything to drown out the words that had lit a fire in my mind. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. Her car pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I watched her through the kitchen window, her face illuminated by the interior lights of her car. She sat there for a moment, phone in hand, before stepping out and heading inside. Hey, you're still up, she said with a surprised smile as she walked through the door, carrying a bag from her favorite boutique. Yeah, I figured I'd wait for you. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice casual. How was brunch with Lisa? Sherry's hesitation was so slight, I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Oh, it was great. We ended up shopping for a bit after. You know Lisa, she never lets me leave without a full bag. She set the bag down on the counter, pulling out a flowy dress and a pair of earrings. See? Harmless fun. Looks like you had a good time, I said, watching her closely. She didn't meet my gaze, busying herself with folding the tissue paper and setting it aside. Yeah, we did. How was your day? It was fine. I took a breath, trying to keep the conversation steady. I saw something interesting earlier, though. A message on your phone from someone named Danny. Sherry froze for the briefest moment, her hands stilling on the bag. Then she turned to me, her expression carefully neutral. Danny? Oh, he's just a guy I met through Lisa's husband. He was at the club the other night with us. My stomach churned. What kind of guy sends a message like that? Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic flashing across her face. Wait, you read my messages? That's a huge invasion of privacy. I didn't read anything. I shot back, my voice rising. It was on the lock screen, Sherry. The words popped up for anyone to see. So why don't you tell me what he meant by that? She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. It's nothing. He was just being flirty, that's all. I barely talked to him. Lisa introduced us, and he probably read too much into it. Flirty? I repeated, disbelief dripping from my tone. So he just randomly decided to text you that, out of nowhere? Yes. Sherry snapped, her voice sharp. God, you're blowing this way out of proportion. He's harmless, okay? I can't control what some random guy texts me. I studied her, searching for cracks in her facade. She was good, too good. But I wasn't sure if it was guilt or indignation fueling her performance. "Why didn't you mention him before?" I pressed. "Because he's not important," she said, exasperated. "I didn't think it mattered, and honestly, I didn't want you to overreact like you're doing right now." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to a misunderstanding. But something deep inside me wouldn't let the conversation end there. "You know, Sherry," I said quietly, "I've always trusted you. But lately I feel like there's a distance between us. You're acting different, and now this, it just doesn't sit right with me." Her expression softened for a moment, guilt flickering across her face before she masked it. "I'm sorry if I've seemed distant," she said, her voice quieter now. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. Maybe I've been stressed or… I don't know. But you have nothing to worry about, okay? I love you. You're my husband." Her words sounded sincere, but they didn't touch the gnawing unease in my chest. "Okay," I said finally, though it was far from okay. "Let's just drop it for now." She nodded, relief flooding her features as she stepped closer, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "Thank you. I'm going to take a shower, okay?" I nodded, watching her retreat down the hallway. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut, I grabbed my laptop and headed to the dining room table. I had to know the truth. It didn't take long to find him, Danny Michaels. His Instagram account was public, and as I scrolled through his photos, my chest tightened. There were pictures from the club the other night, including a group shot of Lisa, Sherry, and several others I didn't recognize. But one photo in particular stopped me cold. Sherry, her arms wrapped around Danny's neck, both of them laughing as if they shared some private joke. His hand rested on her hip, her dress riding slightly higher than I remembered it being. And then there were the comments. "Couple goals. Hot damn, Danny's got moves. Lucky guy." My hands shook as I closed the laptop. The pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Sherry might not have come home with him that night, but something had happened. Something she wasn't telling me. The following day, I woke up with a gnawing pit in my stomach. Sherry was still curled up under the covers, her face serene in the pale morning light. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to let it go, to chalk it up to drunken antics and overactive suspicion. But then the image of her and Danny from his Instagram flashed in my mind, and the uneasy feeling surged back. I got dressed quietly and headed downstairs. The coffee machine gurgled softly as I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. My mind was racing, trying to piece together everything I'd seen. Sherry's behavior, the text, the photo, it didn't add up to anything good. By the time Sherry came down, her hair still damp from the shower, I'd already poured her a cup of coffee. She looked at me with a cautious smile, as though testing the waters. "Morning," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. "Morning." I kept my tone even, though my stomach churned. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected," she replied, taking a sip. "What about you?" "Not bad," I lied. We made small talk over breakfast, the usual chatter about work and plans for the week. She seemed more at ease than the night before, her laughter ringing out as she recounted a story about one of her coworkers. But even as I nodded along, my mind was elsewhere. After she left for work, I decided to dig deeper. I started with her phone records. We shared an account, so I logged in and scanned the call logs and text history. A number I didn't recognize popped up repeatedly over the past few days, often late at night. My stomach tightened when I saw text exchanged the night of her club outing. Without hesitation, I copied the number and plugged it into a reverse lookup site. The results confirmed what I feared: Danny Michaels. I slammed the laptop shut, anger and betrayal bubbling under the surface. My heart raced as I considered my next move. Was it too soon to confront her? Would she deny everything? Before I could spiral further, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Hey! Just checking in on Sherry. She seemed off last night. Everything okay?" Off? What did that mean? I quickly replied. What do you mean, off? She said you guys had a good time shopping. Lisa's response came almost immediately. Shopping? No, we didn't go shopping yesterday. She said she had plans with you. I figured you two worked things out. My blood ran cold. Sherry hadn't spent the afternoon with Lisa, she'd lied. I stared at my phone, Lisa's words replaying in my head. Sherry's web of deceit was starting to unravel, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold back my growing anger. When Sherry came home that evening, I forced myself to act normal, even though every fiber of my being screamed to confront her. She greeted me with a kiss, the faint scent of wine clinging to her. Dinner smells amazing, she said, smiling brightly as she set her bag down. I thought we'd do something nice tonight, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. We ate in relative silence, the clink of silverware on plates the only sound in the room. I watched her closely, noting the way her gaze flicked toward her phone on the counter every so often. After dinner, I poured us both a glass of wine and sat across from her at the table. My heart pounded as I decided to test the waters. So, Lisa texted me earlier, I said casually, swirling the wine in my glass. Sherry's fork paused midair, her expression faltering for a split second. Oh? What did she say? She asked if you were okay, I said, my eyes locked on hers. Said you seemed off last night. Her lips parted slightly, her brows knitting together in confusion. Off? That's weird. I don't know what she means by that. Maybe it's because you told me you were with her yesterday, but she says you weren't. The color drained from Sherry's face. So where were you really, Sherry? I pressed, my voice sharper now. Her gaze darted to her wine glass, her fingers fidgeting nervously. I went for a walk. I just needed some time to myself. A walk? I repeated, incredulous. All afternoon? Yes, she said, her tone defensive. I didn't think it was a big deal. Why are you interrogating me like this? Because you're lying to me, I snapped, slamming my glass down on the table. And I think we both know why. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But instead, she pushed her chair back abruptly and stood. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, she said, her voice shaking. If you don't trust me, that's your problem, not mine. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, my chest heaving with frustration. I had hoped for clarity, but all I was left with were more questions, and the sinking realization that the woman I thought I knew was keeping more secrets than I ever imagined. The slam of the bedroom door echoed through the house, leaving me in a tense silence. I stared at the empty chair across from me, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the table. This wasn't how I expected the night to go. I had hoped Sherry would break down, confess, give me something, anything, but instead, she had deflected, twisted things around, and left me feeling more suspicious than ever. I needed answers, and it was clear she wasn't going to give them willingly. After cleaning up the remnants of dinner, I grabbed my laptop and settled into the living room. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, desperation, but I forced myself to focus. If she was lying to me, I had to find proof. First, I went back to Danny's Instagram. His account was public, which made it easier to scroll through his photos. My stomach churned with each picture, searching for any sign of Sherry. And there it was, another photo from the club. This one was taken later in the night, judging by the way everyone looked a little more disheveled. Sherry stood next to Danny, her arm draped casually over his shoulder. Her smile was bright, her eyes slightly glazed from the alcohol. His hand rested on her waist, fingers splayed possessively. The caption read, "Last night was wild. Clinking beer mugs fire #goodtimes." The comments sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Danny's the man. That red dress though, eyes fire. New couple alert? I couldn't look anymore. Slamming the laptop shut, I ran a hand down my face, my thoughts racing. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something had happened that night, and Sherry was doing everything she could to keep it from me. But what? I considered hiring a private investigator. The thought made me feel sick, but the situation was spiraling out of my control. Before I could think too much about it, my phone buzzed with a message. I picked it up, expecting another text from Lisa or a spam notification. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Alone. Meet me at the Black Swan Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't tell Sherry. Danny." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. Danny? Why the hell was he texting me? The rational part of me wanted to ignore it, to block the number and pretend it hadn't happened. But another part, a darker, more desperate part, needed to know what he had to say. I didn't respond. Instead, I tucked my phone into my pocket and made my way upstairs. The bedroom door was still shut, the light spilling out from underneath. I hesitated for a moment, considering knocking, but the tension in my chest told me it was better to leave her alone. I slept on the couch that night, or at least tried to. The hours dragged by as I stared at the ceiling, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. By the time the sun rose, I was running on fumes. At 9:45 a.m., I found myself parked outside the Black Swan Cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The small coffee shop was quiet, the morning crowd already gone. I stepped inside, scanning the room until I spotted him. Danny sat at a corner table, his leather jacket slung over the back of his chair. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, muscular, with the kind of cocky grin that made my blood boil. He waved me over casually, like we were old friends. Reluctantly, I crossed the room and sat across from him. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice low and tense. Danny leaned back, studying me with a smirk. "You're a brave guy, showing up here. Most husbands wouldn't have the guts." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "Why did you text me?" His grin faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "Because you deserve to know the truth. About Sherry." My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. "What truth?" Danny leaned forward, his voice dropping. "She didn't tell you, did she? About what happened at the club?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Tell me what?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but she came on to me that night. She was drunk, yeah, but she knew what she was doing." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we hooked up," Danny said bluntly. "It didn't mean anything, it was just a drunken mistake. But she's been texting me ever since, saying she regrets it, begging me not to tell you." My vision blurred as the words sank in. "You're lying," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Danny shrugged. "Believe what you want. I'm just telling you the truth. If you want proof, I've got the messages to back it up." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. My hands trembled as I picked it up, scrolling through the thread. There they were. "Sherry, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. Please don't say anything. Sherry, it can't happen again. My husband can't find out. Danny, relax. Your secret's safe with me, winking face. I shoved the phone back at him, my chest heaving. The walls of my world were crumbling, and I didn't know how to stop it. "I thought you should know," Danny said, standing up and slipping his phone into his pocket. "What you do with it is up to you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. As he walked out of the cafe, I sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me. The weight of his words crushed me, leaving me breathless. Sherry had cheated. The drive home was a blur. The words Danny had said replayed in my mind on a loop, each one sharper and more painful than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She came on to me. She knew what she was doing. It was a drunken mistake. She's been texting me ever since, begging me not to tell you. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my mind was a storm of rage, betrayal, and confusion. The house looked the same as it always did, a symbol of the life Sherry and I had built together. But now it felt like a hollow facade, hiding cracks that ran deeper than I could have imagined. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of vanilla candles greeting me. Sherry was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her face lighting up with a smile that only deepened the ache in my chest. "Hey," she said brightly, setting the book aside. "You're home early." "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. I shrugged off my jacket and hung it by the door, forcing myself to keep my movements calm. "Thought I'd take the afternoon off." She stood and stretched, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. Her lips were warm, familiar, but the thought of Danny's words turned the gesture cold. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone casual. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "Eventful." She tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "Oh? What happened?" For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, letting the anger pour out of me. But something held me back. I wanted to see if she'd come clean on her own, to give her one last chance to tell the truth. "Just ran into someone unexpected," I said vaguely, watching her reaction closely. Her smile faltered for a split second, a flicker of something, panic? Guilt, crossing her face. "Oh? Who?" "Danny Michaels," I said, my tone as casual as I could manage. Sherry's face froze, her eyes widening slightly before she quickly looked away. "Danny?" she repeated, her voice a little too high-pitched. What was that about?" "He asked to meet up," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the doorway. "Said he had something important to tell me." Her hands fidgeted at her sides, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "And what did he say?" "You tell me," I said sharply, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Sherry's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me, her hazel eyes wide and filled with something that might have been regret, or fear. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You know why," I snapped. "Stop playing dumb, Sherry." "I know." Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room. "It's not what I think. So you didn't cheat on me? You didn't hook up with him at the club?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I was drunk. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I roared, my voice echoing through the room. "You call betraying me meaningless? Lying to me meaningless? How many times, Sherry? Was it just that night, or have there been others?" "It was just that night," she sobbed, standing and reaching for me. "I swear! I was stupid and drunk and I—" "Don't," I said, stepping back and holding up a hand. "Don't touch me." Her hand dropped, and she looked at me, her face crumpling further. "I was going to tell you," she said weakly. "When? After I found out some other way? After Danny sent me screenshots of your messages?" Her gasp told me she hadn't expected that. "Yeah," I said coldly. "He showed me everything. You begged him not to tell me. You lied to my face, Sherry. And for what? To protect yourself? To keep playing the part of the perfect wife while sneaking around behind my back?" She shook her head frantically. "No! It wasn't like that. It was one mistake, just one. I didn't know how to tell you because I knew it would ruin us." I laughed again, bitter and hollow. "It wasn't the mistake that ruined us, Sherry. It was the lies. The cover-ups. The fact that you didn't even have the decency to come clean." For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, the woman I thought I'd known for 9 years. The woman who had just shattered everything we'd built together. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice cold. "But I need time to think. And you need to give me space." Sherry nodded, tears streaming down her face as she backed away. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," she whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out the door, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me with every step. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, slamming the door behind me with more force than I intended. My breath came in ragged bursts, the adrenaline from our argument coursing through me like wildfire. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. For a moment, I just sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard. The house behind me, our home, felt like a stranger's. Everything I thought I knew about Sherry, about us, was in ruins. I drove without a destination, letting the road guide me. It was late afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the streets. My mind raced, replaying every detail of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been pulling away for longer than I realized? Was I too blind, too trusting, to see what was right in front of me? Eventually, I found myself at the park, the one where Sherry and I used to take evening walks when we were still in that blissful honeymoon phase. I parked and stepped out, the crisp air biting at my skin. The memories of happier times felt like cruel ghosts haunting me. I sat on a bench overlooking the small lake, my head in my hands. I'd spent years building a life with Sherry, trusting her completely. And now, it felt like all of it had been a lie. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, half expecting another text from Sherry. But it wasn't her. It was Lisa. "Hey, just checking in. Is everything okay with you and Sherry?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Lisa was Sherry's closest friend, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she might know more than she let on. After all, if Sherry had been lying to me, what else was she capable of hiding? Finally, I replied, "We're going through something. Did Sherry ever talk to you about Danny?" Her response came quickly. "Danny? The guy from the club? Not really, why?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't want to tip my hand too much, but I needed answers. "She just mentioned him once or twice. Wasn't sure if you knew anything more." This time, there was a pause before Lisa replied. "I didn't know they kept in touch. She said he was just some guy we met that night." "Why? Did something happen?" I clenched my jaw, torn between telling Lisa the truth and keeping it to myself. In the end, I typed back a short response. "Nothing. Don't worry about it." I shoved the phone back into my pocket, frustrated. Lisa's surprise seemed genuine, but it didn't do much to ease my mind. The sound of children laughing drew my attention to the playground nearby. A group of kids chased each other around, their parents watching from nearby benches. For a moment, I envied their innocence, their untainted joy. I stayed at the park until the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning shades of deep orange and purple. When I finally drove home, the lights in the house were dim. Sherry's car was still in the driveway, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside yet. Instead, I sat in the car, staring at the house that had once felt like my sanctuary. My mind churned, trying to figure out what to do next. Divorce felt like a nuclear option, but the thought of staying and pretending nothing had happened made me sick. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to go inside. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sherry was nowhere in sight, but I could see the faint glow of light coming from the guest room. I walked past the closed door without stopping, heading to our bedroom. The sheets on the bed were freshly made, the faint scent of Sherry's perfume lingering in the air. It was a cruel reminder of how close we had once been. On the nightstand was a folded piece of paper with my name written on the front. I picked it up, my heart pounding as I unfolded it. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope we can talk when you're ready. I'll give you as much space as you need. Please know that I love you, even if I've failed to show it." I crumpled the note in my hand, anger flaring again. Love? She called this love? How could someone who loved me betray me so completely? I threw the note in the trash and climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, every second stretching into an eternity. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it finally did, It was restless and filled with vivid, tormenting dreams of Sherry and Danny. I woke up the next morning feeling worse than ever, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Something had to change. And as much as I hated it, I knew the next step was to confront Sherry, completely, directly, with no room for her to squirm out of it. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, stark and unforgiving. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying everything Sherry had said, and hadn't said, during our argument. The note on the nightstand felt like an insult, its carefully chosen words ringing hollow. I got up and dressed mechanically, my movements fueled by a simmering anger I could no longer contain. If I was going to confront her, I needed answers, and I needed them now. The guest room door was still closed when I stepped into the hallway. I stood outside for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, I knocked sharply. "Sherry," I called, my voice firm. There was a rustling sound, followed by her hesitant reply. "Come in." I pushed the door open to find her sitting on the bed, her legs crossed beneath her. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her face pale and puffy from crying. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, twisting nervously. "Can we talk?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yeah, we need to." I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms. The room felt oppressively quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. "Why don't you start by telling me the truth?" I said, my tone colder than I intended. Sherry flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the bed. "I told you, I made a mistake. I was drunk, and I didn't mean for it to happen." I scoffed. "You didn't mean for it to happen? What does that even mean, Sherry? You accidentally fell into bed with him?" Her head snapped up, her hazel eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't thinking straight, okay? I was upset, and I drank too much, and Danny was just there." "Upset about what?" I demanded. "What could possibly justify this?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "You've been so distant lately," she said quietly. "We barely spend time together anymore. It feels like you don't see me the way you used to." I stared at her, disbelief flooding my chest. "So this is my fault now?" "No," she cried, shaking her head. "I'm not saying that. I've been feeling so alone, and when Danny started talking to me, I felt, noticed." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Noticed?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Sherry, I've spent 9 years building a life with you. Supporting you. Loving you. And you're telling me you needed some random guy at a club to make you feel noticed?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she choked out. "I hate myself for what I did. I know I ruined everything." The sight of her crying would have broken me once. But now, it only fueled my anger. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start?" I demanded. "You had every opportunity to come clean, but instead, you lied to my face. You let me find out from him." Her sobs quieted, and she looked up at me, her expression desperate. "Because I was scared, okay? I was terrified of losing you. I thought, if I didn't say anything, maybe we could move past it." "Move past it?" I echoed bitterly. How exactly were we supposed to move past something I didn't even know about? She didn't answer. Her silence spoke volumes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Did you ever think about me, Sherry? About what this would do to me? To us?" "Of course I did," she cried. "I think about it every second of every day. I hate myself for hurting you. I'd do anything to take it back. Except tell the truth," I said coldly. Her face crumpled again, and she reached for me. "Please, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." I stepped back, her touch feeling like fire on my skin. "It's not that simple, Sherry. You don't just undo something like this. You can't fix what you've broken overnight." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I love you. I love us. Doesn't that mean anything? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Did it mean anything? Could love survive this kind of betrayal? I don't know, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Sherry's tears fell silently as she nodded, her shoulders shaking. I'll give you space, she said softly. Whatever you need. Just, please don't give up on me. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. As I sat in the living room, staring at the empty walls, I realized I was at a crossroads. The woman I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I had no idea if we could come back from it. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, each step heavy and uncertain. Sherry and I lived under the same roof, but the space between us felt insurmountable. She stayed mostly in the guest room, only venturing out for meals or the occasional awkward conversation. I buried myself in work, taking on extra projects to avoid being home more than necessary. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the memories and questions lingered. Had there been warning signs I missed? Was I somehow responsible for the fracture in our marriage? One evening, as I sat alone in the living room with a glass of whiskey, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa. Hey, just checking in again. Are you okay? I'm worried about you guys. Lisa's concern felt genuine, but it also reminded me of how small our world had become. Sherry and I had always kept a tight-knit circle of friends. If word of her affair got out, it would spread like wildfire. I hesitated before replying. We're dealing with some things. Appreciate you reaching out. The response was vague, but it was all I could muster. As the days turned into weeks, Sherry made every effort to prove she was trying to make things right. She stopped drinking entirely, started cooking elaborate dinners, and even left handwritten notes on the kitchen counter apologizing for everything she'd done. But her attempts felt hollow. No amount of carefully prepared meals or heartfelt words could erase the image of her with Danny. One night, after another tense dinner in near silence, Sherry finally broke. I can't take this anymore, she said, her voice trembling. I know I screwed up, but I don't know how to fix this if you won't talk to me. I set my fork down, my appetite long gone. What do you want me to say, Sherry? That everything's fine? That I'm ready to forgive and forget? Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. No. I just want to know what you're thinking. You barely look at me anymore. Because every time I do, I see him, I said bluntly. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. I don't know how to change that. I don't think you can, I said, my voice heavy. That's the problem. You keep saying you'll do whatever it takes, but this isn't something that can be undone. Sherry sat back, her shoulders slumping. I know, she whispered. But I can't lose you. I can't lose us. I rubbed my temples, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Do you even know why you did it? I asked, my tone softer now. Or was it just a moment of weakness? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. I think I was trying to feel something, she admitted. Something I haven't felt in a long time. I don't know if it was about you, or me, or just everything. Her honesty caught me off guard, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than anger, sadness. You should have talked to me, I said quietly. I know, she replied, her voice cracking. And I'm so sorry I didn't. I was scared. Of how you'd react. Of admitting that I wasn't happy. The words stung, but they also opened a door I hadn't expected. Sherry wasn't the only one who had been pretending everything was fine. Somewhere along the way, we'd both stopped trying. But was that enough to move forward? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. Sherry reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. Then let's figure it out. Together. I pulled my hand away, the gesture feeling too intimate. I need time, I said. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need. Just don't give up on me. On us. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and left the room, retreating to the quiet solace of the bedroom. A few days later, I made an appointment with a therapist. I'd never considered therapy before, but I couldn't untangle the mess of emotions on my own. If nothing else, I needed clarity, for myself. The therapist, a calm, gray-haired woman named Dr. Nolan, listened patiently as I spilled everything. The affair. The lies. The anger. Have you thought about what you want? She asked after I'd finished. I shook my head. I can't think straight. 1 minute, I want to walk away and never look back. The next, I'm wondering if there's something worth saving. Dr. Nolan nodded. It's natural to feel conflicted. Betrayal shakes the foundation of a relationship, and rebuilding trust takes time. But it's important to focus on what you need, not just what Sherry wants. I left the session feeling slightly lighter, though no closer to a decision. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, Sherry's soft voice broke the silence. Can we try therapy? Together? I didn't answer right away. The thought of sitting in a room with her, unpacking every painful detail, felt like opening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. But I nodded. We can try. Her relief was palpable, though I didn't feel the same. For me, it was just another step in a journey I wasn't sure I wanted to take. Sherry and I scheduled our first joint therapy session the following week. The car ride there was silent, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. She fidgeted with her hands in her lap, glancing at me every few minutes, but I kept my focus on the road. When we arrived, the receptionist greeted us with a warm smile, ushering us into the waiting room. Sherry sat close to me, but the gulf between us felt enormous. I wondered if she could feel it too. Dr. Nolan emerged a few minutes later, her calm demeanor putting me at ease despite the storm raging inside. She ushered us into her office, a cozy space with muted colors and soft lighting. A box of tissues sat prominently on the coffee table between two comfortable chairs. Thank you both for coming, Dr. Nolan said as we sat down. I know this isn't an easy step to take, but it's an important one. Either of us spoke. Sherry looked down at her hands, and I stared at a framed photo on the wall, my jaw clenched. Let's start by talking about why you're here, Dr. Nolan prompted gently. What brings you to therapy as a couple? I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. Sherry beat me to it. I messed up, she said softly, her voice trembling. I betrayed him, and I don't know how to fix it. Dr. Nolan nodded, her expression neutral. Thank you for being honest, Sherry. And what about you? She turned to me. What do you hope to get out of this process? I took a deep breath, forcing the words out. Clarity, I said. I need to figure out if this is even worth saving. Sherry's head snapped up, her eyes wide and filled with hurt. I felt a pang of guilt but didn't look away. That's an honest place to start, Dr. Nolan said, her tone encouraging. This process is about exploring those feelings, even the difficult ones. For the next hour, we talked, or rather, I talked while Sherry listened. I laid everything out, the anger, the betrayal, the sleepless nights. Dr. Nolan guided the conversation, asking questions that forced me to confront things I hadn't even admitted to myself. When it was Sherry's turn, she spoke about her guilt and regret, her voice breaking several times. She explained how she'd felt lost and disconnected, how Danny's attention had been a temporary escape from her own insecurities. It wasn't about him, she said through tears. It was about me. And I hate that I let it go that far. I hate what I did to you. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time, I felt a flicker of understanding, not forgiveness, but the faintest glimpse of the person she was behind her mistake. The sessions continued over the following weeks. Some days they felt productive, like we were peeling back layers of resentment and pain to uncover something real. Other days, it felt like we were digging into a wound that would never fully heal. Outside of therapy, things remained strained. Sherry was doing everything she could to rebuild trust, answering every question I asked, giving me access to her phone, even keeping a journal she encouraged me to read. But no matter how hard she tried, I couldn't shake the image of her and Danny. It haunted me, a constant reminder of what had been broken. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table in silence, I finally spoke up. "Do you ever think about him?" I asked abruptly. Sherry looked up, startled. "What?" "Danny," I said, my voice flat. "Do you ever think about him?" Her face twisted in pain. "No," she said firmly. "I don't. He meant nothing to me, I swear." "Then why?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why him? Why that night? Why throw everything away for someone who meant nothing to you?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You don't just destroy a marriage over nothing, Sherry," I said, my frustration spilling over. "So what was it? What did he give you that I didn't?" She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know," she choked out. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid and selfish and what?" I demanded. "And I hated myself," she whispered. The words caught me off guard. "What?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I hated myself. I hated feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was failing you, failing us. And instead of dealing with it, I made the worst mistake of my life." The anger in my chest wavered, replaced by a confusing mix of emotions, sadness, empathy, even a sliver of pity. "You should have talked to me," I said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." For the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor. She wasn't just the villain in this story, she was a broken, flawed person who had made a terrible choice. But was that enough? Could I see past the betrayal to the person underneath? "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. Sherry reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine. "Please," she said softly. "Don't give up on us." "Not yet." I didn't pull away, but I didn't take her hand either. "I don't know," I repeated. And for now, that was the only truth I could offer. The days blurred together after that night. I woke up, went to work, came home, and existed in a strange limbo. Sherry and I moved around each other like shadows, either of us daring to disturb the fragile peace that had settled. In therapy, progress came in small, tentative steps. Dr. Nolan encouraged us to talk openly about our feelings, but the conversations were like walking through a minefield. Every word had the potential to ignite another explosion. One evening, Sherry approached me as I sat in the living room, flipping through channels without really watching anything. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I turned off the TV and nodded, bracing myself. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About how I should have talked to you instead of—" She trailed off, her face crumpling. I waited, my heart heavy. "You're right," she continued. "I should have told you how I was feeling. I should have told you that I felt lost. Instead, I made the worst mistake of my life, and now I'm terrified that I've ruined everything." Her honesty cut through me, but it didn't ease the ache in my chest. "Why now?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Why are you just figuring this out now?" "Because I didn't want to face it," she admitted. "I didn't want to admit that I was unhappy or that I was failing you. It was easier to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine." "And Danny?" I pressed, the name bitter on my tongue. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "He was a distraction. A mistake. I don't even think I was really there, you know? It felt like I was watching myself from the outside, like I wasn't in control." I leaned back, trying to process her words. They sounded sincere, but sincerity didn't erase what had happened. "You say it didn't mean anything," I said slowly. "But it meant something to me. It meant breaking my trust. It meant destroying the life we built together." Sherry nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me." I didn't respond, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The next week, Dr. Nolan suggested an exercise, a weekend getaway. She said it might help us reconnect, to see if there was still something worth saving. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said during the session. I understand, Dr. Nolan replied. But sometimes stepping away from the familiar can give you a new perspective. It's not about pretending everything's okay, it's about exploring what's still there. Sherry looked at me hopefully. I think it's worth a try, she said softly. Her eagerness made me wary. Was she hoping for a quick fix? Or was she genuinely willing to face the cracks in our foundation? Reluctantly, I agreed. We chose a cabin a few hours away, nestled in the woods near a quiet lake. The drive there was tense, the silence between us filled with unspoken fears and expectations. When we arrived, the cabin was cozy and rustic, the kind of place we might have visited in happier times. Sherry unpacked while I stood on the deck, staring out at the lake and wondering what I was doing here. The first day was awkward. We went for a hike, the conversation stilted and strained. Sherry kept trying to draw me out, but I stayed guarded, unwilling to let my walls down. That evening, we cooked dinner together in the tiny kitchen. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like we were just a couple on vacation, laughing as we bumped into each other in the cramped space. But then the laughter faded, and the weight of everything between us came rushing back. After dinner, we sat by the fire, the silence stretching out until Sherry finally spoke. "Do you think we can come back from this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted. She stared into the flames, her hands clasped tightly around her mug of tea. "I want to believe we can," she said. "I want to believe that what we have is stronger than this." Her words hung in the air, heavy and hopeful. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "And even if I could, I don't know if I can forget." Sherry nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forget," she said. I want to find a way to move forward, even if it's hard. Even if it takes time." Her vulnerability hit me in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, not the stranger who had betrayed me. But was that enough? As the fire crackled and the night deepened, I realized I didn't have an answer. All I had was the moment, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The morning at the cabin was quiet, the stillness broken only by the rustle of wind through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. Sherry was in the kitchen making breakfast while I sat on the deck, staring out at the lake. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched on the table beside me. I wanted to believe that this getaway could be a turning point, a chance to start fresh. But no matter how much I tried to focus on the present, the memories of Sherry's betrayal loomed like dark clouds over everything. "Breakfast is ready," she called softly from the doorway. I glanced over my shoulder and nodded, forcing myself to stand. The smell of eggs and bacon wafted through the small cabin, a nostalgic scent that reminded me of the lazy Sunday mornings we used to share. We sat across from each other at the small table, the plates between us an unspoken barrier. Sherry tried to make small talk, her voice warm but hesitant. I answered in monosyllables, my mind elsewhere. Finally, she put her fork down and sighed. "We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "If this is going to work, we need to talk. Really talk." I looked up from my plate, meeting her gaze. "What do you want me to say, Sherry? That I forgive you? That I can forget everything that happened?" She shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "No. I just want you to tell me how you feel. Even if it's hard. Even if it hurts." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "You want to know how I feel? Fine. I feel betrayed. I feel like the person I trusted most in the world stabbed me in the back. I feel like I'm trying to hold on to something that's already gone." Sherry flinched, but she didn't look away. "I deserve that," she said quietly. "And I hate that I made you feel this way. I hate myself for what I did." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment I just sat there, watching her cry. The part of me that still loved her wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But the part of me that was still angry, still hurt, kept me rooted in place. After a long silence, I spoke. "Why did you do it?" Sherry wiped her eyes and looked at me, her expression raw. "I was lost," she said. "I felt like I was disappearing, like I wasn't enough. And instead of talking to you, I looked for validation in the worst possible place. I was selfish and stupid, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Her honesty cut through me, leaving me raw and exposed. "Do you even understand what you've done to us?" I asked, my voice rising. "To me? I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust, even if it takes years. But I can't do it alone. I need you to meet me halfway." "Halfway?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You're asking for a lot, Sherry. You don't just get to destroy everything and then expect me to pick up the pieces with you." "I know," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "But I'm not giving up on us. I can't. I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if I have to." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. I wanted to believe her, to believe that love could overcome betrayal. But the scars she'd left on my heart were still fresh, still bleeding. "I need time," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't make any promises right now." Sherry nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "I'll give you all the time you need," she said softly. "Just don't shut me out completely. Please." That afternoon, we went for a walk along the lake, the tension between us easing slightly in the open air. Sherry tried to fill the silence with stories and memories, her voice soft and nostalgic. I listened, but I didn't respond, my thoughts too tangled to form coherent words. When we returned to the cabin, she suggested playing cards, something we used to do during lazy weekends at home. Reluctantly, I agreed, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, as she fumbled with the deck and accused me of cheating. For a brief moment, it felt like we were us again. But as night fell and the cabin grew quiet, the weight of everything returned. Sherry went to bed early, leaving me alone by the fire. I stared into the flames, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? Or was it already too late? The next morning, the cabin felt unusually cold. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, but it didn't bring the peace it once had. Sherry was already up, her quiet movements in the kitchen reaching me through the open bedroom door. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the wooden beams above me. I had hoped that coming here would provide clarity, a way to untangle the mess of emotions that had consumed me since the truth came out. But if anything, it had only added to the confusion. Eventually, I got up and joined her in the kitchen. She was dressed in a cozy sweater, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked up when I walked in, offering a tentative smile. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning." She placed a cup of coffee on the table and gestured for me to sit. "I thought we could talk some more today," she said, her voice hesitant. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what there was left to say. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our coffee as the sunlight streamed through the windows. Finally, Sherry set her cup down and looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began. "About trust. And I know I can't fix that overnight, but I need to know if you believe it's even possible." I stared at her, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Right now, it feels impossible. But I can't tell if that's because of what you did or because I'm too angry to see past it." She nodded, her expression solemn. "That's fair," she said. "I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. And if you decide you can't forgive me, I'll have to live with that." Her honesty caught me off guard. For weeks she had been pleading, apologizing, promising to do better. But now, she seemed resigned, as if she had finally accepted the possibility that we might not make it. I don't want to give up on us, I said slowly. But I also don't know if I can live like this, constantly questioning everything, wondering if I'll ever feel normal again. Sherry reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine. I'll do whatever it takes, she said softly. But I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise it'll ever feel the way it did before. All I can promise is that I'll keep trying. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Later that day, we decided to go out on the lake in the small rowboat the cabin provided. The water was calm, the sunlight glinting off its surface. Sherry rowed quietly, her movements steady and measured. It's beautiful out here, she said, breaking the silence. Yeah, I replied, though my gaze was fixed on the horizon. We floated in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft splash of water and the distant call of birds. Sherry stopped rowing and let the boat drift, her hands resting on the oars. I miss us, she said suddenly, her voice breaking. I miss the way we used to be, before I ruined everything. I looked at her, her face etched with sadness. I miss it too, I admitted. But I don't know if we can get back there. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. Maybe we can't, she said quietly. But I'm willing to try, even if it takes the rest of my life. Her vulnerability was heartbreaking, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than anger, something closer to hope. Do you think you can ever forgive me? She asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared out at the water, the weight of her question pressing down on me. I want to, I said finally. But forgiveness isn't enough. I need to know that we can build something real again, something honest. And I don't know if that's possible. Sherry nodded, her tears falling freely now. I understand, she said. And no matter what you decide, I'll accept it. I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that I'm still the person you fell in love with. Her words stayed with me long after we returned to the cabin. That night, as we sat by the fire, I found myself looking at her differently. She was broken, but she was trying. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, we could try too. The fire crackled softly, its warmth filling the small cabin as Sherry and I sat across from each other. She was nursing a mug of tea, her eyes fixed on the flames, while I stared at her, trying to find the words to say. I had spent days, weeks, agonizing over this moment. Every emotion, anger, hurt, love, fear, had wrestled for control. And now, as the night deepened and the firelight flickered against her tear-streaked face, I knew it was time to decide. I've been thinking a lot. I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Sherry looked up, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything, waiting for me to continue. I've been trying to figure out if I can move past what you did, I said slowly. If I can trust you again. If we can rebuild what we had. Her hands tightened around her mug, her knuckles white. And? She whispered. I took a deep breath, the words heavy on my tongue. I don't know if I'll ever forget what happened. But I don't think I want to walk away from us. Not yet. Her eyes widened, tears spilling over as her breath caught. You mean that? I do, I said, though my voice wavered. But there are conditions, Sherry. This isn't a free pass. If we're going to do this, it has to be different. Honest. Transparent. You have to earn my trust back, and that's going to take time, a lot of time. She nodded quickly, her tears flowing freely now. I'll do anything, she said, her voice trembling. Whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy, I'll answer every question, Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. I just want us back. I do too, I said quietly. But we're not going back to what we were, Sherry. That's gone. If we're going to move forward, it has to be something new. Something better. She lowered her hands, her gaze locked on mine. I'll prove to you that I'm worth it, she said. I'll prove that we're worth it. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes, a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was enough to make me want to try. The next morning, we packed up the cabin and drove home in silence, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It felt lighter. Tentative. When we got home, Sherry moved her things back into the guest room without a word. I didn't ask her to stay or to leave. We both knew this wasn't about rushing into anything. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. We continued therapy, both together and individually. Sherry kept her promises, being completely open about everything, her feelings, her actions, her fears. It was exhausting, painful work, but it felt like progress. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Sherry turned to me, her expression soft. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me a chance to fix this," she said. "For not giving up on me." I looked at her, my emotions tangled and raw. "I'm not doing this for you," I said honestly. "I'm doing it for us. Because I think we're worth saving. But if you ever betray me again—" "I won't," she said quickly, her voice firm. "Never again." I nodded, though a part of me knew that trust wasn't something that could be restored overnight. It would take months, years even, to rebuild what had been lost. Months passed, and slowly, things began to change. The anger and resentment didn't disappear entirely, but they dulled, replaced by cautious optimism. We found new ways to connect, to communicate, to understand each other. One evening, as we walked hand in hand through the park near our house, I realized something I hadn't expected. We weren't the same people we had been before the betrayal. The cracks in our marriage hadn't been erased, but they had been filled with something stronger: honesty, vulnerability, and a determination to rebuild. "I love you," Sherry said, squeezing my hand. "I love you too," I replied, the words no longer feeling like a question. The path ahead wasn't easy or guaranteed, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might just make it.